The cafe had gone dead silent. Gary stood just inside the door, chest heaving, finger pointed at Sujin like a man who'd already made peace with whatever was about to happen next. "You think you can just take what's mine?" Sujin didn't answer. He stood 6 feet away, jacket buttoned, hands at his sides. Behind him, Harry had one hand inside his coat. Somewhere across the cafe, Steve stood near the counter, not in uniform, not carrying authority, carrying something heavier. Sherry watched from behind the glass partition, comfort gripping her arm, Jessica already reaching for a phone that wouldn't help. This was the moment the whole thing had been building toward. Not bullets, not blood. A choice. Because the thing about Sujin, the thing that made him the most dangerous man in any room he walked into, wasn't his empire, wasn't his connections, wasn't the quiet army that moved when he breathed. It was his patience. And Gary had just run out of it. But to understand how a napkin in a Houston cafe led to this exact moment, we need to go back to the beginning. If this story grabs you, hit subscribe now, because it's about to grab harder. Sujin learned stillness the way most people learn pain, early and without a choice. He was 9 years old the first time his father broke something in the house that wasn't furniture. His mother's wrist. A clean snap that sounded like a chopstick breaking under a thumb. She didn't scream. She just held her arm against her chest and kept her eyes on the floor. Sujin was standing in the hallway, watching. His father turned and looked at him, didn't say a word, didn't have to. The message was simple: move and you're next. So Sujin stood still. That night, his mother wrapped her own wrist with a dishcloth and a wooden spoon for a splint. She looked at her son sitting on the edge of the bed and said something he'd carry for the rest of his life. The man who moves first loses. She wasn't talking about fighting. She was talking about surviving. By 15, Sujin was running packages for a mid-level crew in Incheon. Not because he wanted to, because his father drank himself into debt and the landlord didn't accept apologies. He was quiet, efficient, forgettable. The kind of kid who could walk through a room and leave no trace he'd ever been there. That's what caught the eye of a man named Mr. Kwon. Kwon ran the port. Not officially, on paper he owned a seafood distribution company. But everybody in Incheon knew that nothing moved through those docks without Kwon's blessing. He was old school, disciplined, the kind of boss who'd pour you tea before he ordered your execution. He saw something in Sujin that nobody else bothered to look for. Control. Not the loud kind, not the kind that comes from threats and violence. The kind that comes from a person who has already decided, deep in their bones, that they will never be the one caught off guard again. Kwon brought Sujin into the inner circle at 17. By 22, he was managing Kwon's books. By 26, he was handling negotiations with rival families across 3 provinces, and he did all of it the same way. Quietly. Most people in that world rise by being the loudest, the most violent, the most unpredictable. Sujin rose by being the opposite. He listened more than he spoke. He watched more than he acted. And when he finally moved, it was already over. Kwon died of a stroke in 2014. Left the entire operation to Sujin, not his nephew, not his underboss. A kid he'd pulled off the streets 20 years earlier. The organization didn't fight it. They didn't even question it. Because by then, every single one of them had learned the same lesson Sujin's mother taught him on that bed with a broken wrist. The man who moves first loses. And Sujin never moved first. Until Houston. Houston wasn't Sujin's city. He had no business here, no territory, no contacts worth mentioning. He was here for one reason, a medical consultation at MD Anderson Cancer Center. Not for him, for Harry. Harry had been Sujin's shadow for 11 years. Former Korean Special Forces, built like a refrigerator with a neck. The kind of man who could clear a room with his posture alone. But 3 weeks ago, Harry had collapsed during a morning briefing, coughed blood into his palm and tried to hide it by closing his fist. Sujin saw it. He always saw it. The doctors in Seoul wanted to run more tests. Soojin didn't trust more tests. He trusted results. So he flew Harry to the best cancer hospital in the world and booked a suite at the Lancaster Hotel downtown. That Tuesday morning, while Harry was in his third hour of scans, Soojin walked 2 blocks to a café called Rosewood on Main. Small place, warm lighting. The kind of spot where people come to be left alone. He ordered black coffee, sat by the window, opened a newspaper he couldn't fully read because his English was functional but not fluent. And that's when he heard it. Not a scream, not a shout, something worse. A whimper. The kind of sound a person makes when they've been trained to keep their pain quiet, when volume means consequences. Soojin knew that sound. He'd heard his mother make it 100 times through the walls of their Incheon apartment. He looked up. Across the cafe, near the entrance, a woman sat at a 2-person table, mid-20s, beautiful in the way that people who have stopped trying to be noticed sometimes are. She wore a nurse's uniform. Her name tag read Sherry. Standing over her was a man, tall, athletic, jaw clenched so tight the muscles in his neck were twitching. His hand was wrapped around her forearm, not holding it, gripping it, the way you grab something you believe belongs to you. I said we're leaving, now. Sherry didn't look up, she just whispered, "Gary, please, not here." And there it was, that word, please, the negotiation of someone who's already lost. The cafe had maybe 12 people in it. Every single one of them looked away. Some pulled out their phones. Some suddenly found the menu fascinating. One couple near the back actually got up and left. Nobody moved toward her. Soojin set his coffee down. In his world, there was a code. You don't involve yourself in other people's affairs. Kwon taught him that. Mind the business that feeds you. Emotion is debt. He knew the code. He'd lived by it for 30 years. But when Gary yanked Sherry to her feet and raised his open hand above her face in a room full of people who pretended to be blind, Soojin slowly stood up. And every rule he'd ever followed went quiet. Now, what happened next in that cafe would set off a chain of events that nobody in this story saw coming. Not Sherry, not Gary, and definitely not Gary's brother, the one who wore a badge. 12 feet. That's the distance between Soojin's table and the spot where Gary stood with his hand in the air. 12 feet is nothing, a heartbeat, a breath. But Soojin didn't rush. He didn't charge. He didn't raise his voice. He picked up his napkin, folded it once, and walked those 12 feet like he was crossing a living room in his own house. Gary saw him coming. His hand was still raised. His eyes shifted, confused, because Soojin wasn't looking at him. He wasn't looking at him at all. Soojin pulled out the empty chair next to Sherry, sat down, and placed the folded napkin in front of her. "For your arm," he said. His accent was thick, but his voice was calm, almost soft. Sherry stared at him. Her forearm had red marks where Gary's fingers had been. She didn't take the napkin. She didn't move. She'd been conditioned to freeze when a new variable entered a dangerous equation. Gary lowered his hand, slowly, not because he'd changed his mind, because he'd lost the audience. The dynamic had shifted. There was a man sitting at his woman's table who hadn't flinched, hadn't threatened, hadn't even acknowledged his existence. And that is what made it so dangerous. There's a principle that every person who's ever held real power understands. You don't fight aggression with aggression. You fight it with indifference, because aggression needs resistance to survive. It feeds on fear, on reaction, on the other person matching your energy. Take that away and the aggressor is left standing alone, performing for an audience that's no longer watching. Gary's jaw tightened. "Who the hell are you?" Soojin picked up the small menu card on the table and glanced at it casually, like Gary was a television playing in another room. "Yo, I'm talking to you." "Nothing." I said who the... "Gary," Sherry's voice, barely above a whisper. "Just go, please just go." Gary looked at Sherry, looked at Soojin, looked around the cafe at the 12 people who were now watching because someone had finally broken the spell of collective silence. He leaned down close to Sherry's face, close enough that Soojin could smell the cologne and the stale beer underneath it. This ain't over. 3 words, the anthem of every man who confuses possession with love. He left, slammed the door hard enough to rattle the window frame. His car peeled out of the parking lot 30 seconds later. The café exhaled. Sherry sat there, hands flat on the table, eyes wet but refusing to fall. She looked at the napkin, then at Soo-jin. You shouldn't have done that. Soo-jin didn't respond right away. He looked at the red marks on her arm, looked at the way her hands trembled even though her face was stone. He'd seen this before, not in a cafe, in a kitchen in Incheon, on a woman who wrapped her own broken wrist and called it an accident. Does he do this often? Sherry almost laughed. Almost. You're a stranger. Yes. So why do you care? Soo-jin considered the question, really sat with it, because the truth was complicated. The truth involved a 9-year-old boy in a hallway and a sound he couldn't unhear no matter how many years or how many oceans he put between himself and that apartment. But he didn't say any of that. He just said, because nobody else in here did. Sherry looked at him for a long time. Then she picked up the napkin. Soo-jin placed a small business card on the table next to his coffee cup. No name, just a phone number and the logo of the Lancaster Hotel. If he comes back, Soo-jin said, call this number. Ask for room 714. And somewhere across Houston, Gary was already dialing a number that belonged to his older brother Steve. The man with a badge. Steve picked up on the second ring. He always picked up for Gary, not out of love, out of obligation, because Gary was the younger brother who never grew up, never stopped making messes, and never once cleaned one up himself. That was Steve's job, had been since they were kids in 3rd Ward. Steve was HPD, 12 years on the force, not a detective, a senior patrol officer with enough connections in the department to make problems appear and disappear depending on who was asking. He wasn't dirty in the obvious way. He didn't take envelopes or run protection. He was dirty in the quiet way, the kind of dirty that looks like favors between friends. Gary was talking fast, angry. Something about a man at the cafe, an Asian guy, sat down at Sherry's table, disrespected him in public. Steve listened, waited for the important part. He disrespected me, Steve, in front of everybody. There it was, the real wound. Not concern, not confusion, ego. Steve sighed. He'd had this conversation 100 times. About Sherry. About the woman before Sherry. About the pattern Gary refused to see because seeing it would mean admitting something about himself that he'd rather set on fire than face. But Steve never said any of that, because confronting Gary meant confronting their father, and their father was a grave nobody in the family visited. Did you get a plate number? Black SUV, rental plates, looked expensive. I'll run it, just stay away from Sherry tonight. Let me handle this. Gary hung up without saying goodbye. He never said goodbye. Goodbye implied the other person had a choice in the conversation. Meanwhile, across town, Sherry sat in the living room of her sister Comfort's apartment. Jessica was there too, Sherry's coworker from the hospital. The 3 of them formed a triangle that had held Sherry together for the past 8 months since she'd finally left Gary. Comfort paced. She always paced when she was angry. You need to file a report. And say what? Sherry's voice was flat, exhausted. He grabbed my arm in a cafe. His brother is HPD Comfort. Who's going to take that report? Jessica sat on the arm of the couch. What about the guy, the one who stepped in? Sherry looked down at the business card she'd been holding since she left the cafe. He was different. Different how? Sherry thought about it, about the way Soo-jin had sat down without performing, without posturing, without making it about himself. Every man she'd ever known who'd tried to help her had done it loudly. Look at me, I'm the hero. Soo-jin hadn't even looked at Gary. He was calm, she said, like dangerously calm. Comfort stopped packing. Dangerously calm is still dangerous, Sherry. She was right, but for the first time in a long time, dangerous didn't feel like it was pointed at her. But here's the thing. While Sherry was debating whether to trust a stranger, Steve was running those plates. And what he found was about to turn a domestic dispute into something far more dangerous than anyone imagined. Steve ran the plates on a black Cadillac Escalade, rented from Enterprise under a corporate account, registered to a company called Hanjin Pacific Group. On the surface, a South Korean import-export conglomerate, seafood, electronics, textiles, legitimate enough to pass any standard background check. But Steve didn't run standard background checks. He typed the name into a federal database he wasn't supposed to have access to, a contact at the Houston field office, a clerk named Belinda who owed him favors and never asked questions. What came back made him put the phone down and pick it right back up. Flags from Interpol, the DEA, the South Korean National Intelligence Service, not warrants, not charges. Flags, the kind of quiet markers that law enforcement places on organizations they can't touch but refuse to stop watching. And at the center of every flag was one name. Soo-jin. No last name in the file, just Soo-jin, like the man existed outside the rules that applied to everyone else. Surveillance photos, grainy long-lens shots from Seoul, Busan, Hong Kong, and Houston. Recent. Soo-jin walking into MD Anderson Cancer Center. Alone, no entourage. But the footnote read, subject believed to oversee Kwon's syndicate operations. Estimated network value, $2.1 billion USD. Approach with extreme caution. Steve closed the laptop. His little brother had picked a fight with a man worth $2 billion. A man flagged by international intelligence agencies. A man whose organization had the word syndicate attached to it. Over a woman. Steve called Gary 3 times. Third time Gary picked up, music blasting, a bar. The guy from the café. You need to forget about him. You're joking. Gary, I'm not joking. This man is connected in ways that you and I cannot afford to be on the wrong side of. So what, I'm supposed to be scared? Some foreign dude sits next to my girl, and I'm supposed to. She's not your girl, Gary. It came out before Steve could stop it. 8 months of silence on that subject, broken in one sentence. The line went dead. Steve knew that silence. It was the same silence their father used to fill a room with before the belt came off the hook. The silence that meant the conversation wasn't over. It was just moving to a place where words wouldn't be involved. And Steve was right, because Gary didn't go home that night. He went to Comfort's apartment, and what happened next would change everything. Comfort opened the door at 11:47 p.m. and found Gary standing in the hallway smelling like whiskey and bad intentions. His eyes were glassy. His fists were at his sides, but the knuckles were white. Where is she? She's not here, Gary. Comfort's voice didn't shake. She'd practiced this, rehearsed it in the mirror on nights when she knew this moment was coming. Don't lie to me. Go home. He put his hand on the door, not pushing, just holding it, the way a man holds something to remind you he can push whenever he decides to. From inside the apartment, Jessica was already on the phone, not with the police. She'd learned a long time ago that calling the police when the abuser's brother wore the badge was like calling the wolf to save you from the wolf. She dialed the number on the business card Sherry had left on the kitchen counter. Room 714 at the Lancaster Hotel. It took 45 seconds. And then a voice answered, calm, measured, like a man who'd been expecting this call his entire life. Yes. Soo-jin didn't ask questions. He asked for an address. Jessica gave it to him. Her voice was shaking, but her words were precise. Nurse instincts, clear information under pressure. He's at the door, he's drunk, he's not leaving. Soo-jin hung up, looked across the hotel suite at Harry, who was lying on the couch with an IV bruise on his arm from the day's tests. Stay here. Harry sat up, slowly, painfully. Where are you going? Out. Soo-jin. Stay here. Harry had known Soo-jin for 11 years. He'd seen him calm in rooms where calm shouldn't exist, but he'd never heard that tone before. Sujin arrived at Comfort's apartment building at 12:06 a.m. He could hear Gary before he saw him, not yelling, talking low, the dangerous register. The frequency that women who have lived with violent men recognize the way animals recognize a predator's breathing pattern. "Open the door, Comfort. I'm not gonna ask again." Sujin came around the corner of the hallway and stopped 10 feet away. Gary turned. And for the second time that day, these two men stood facing each other. But this wasn't a cafe. There were no witnesses, no menus to pretend to read. This was a dimly lit hallway at midnight, and the air between them had weight. "You," Gary's eyes narrowed, "you following me now?" Sujin said nothing. He stood there, hands at his sides, eyes locked on Gary's chest, not his eyes, because the eyes lie. The chest tells you when a man is about to move. The shoulders telegraph the punch before the fist even forms. Kwon taught him that in 1998, and it had saved his life more times than he could count. Gary took a step closer, close enough that Sujin could smell the whiskey sweating through his pores. "You don't know who you're messing with." Sujin finally spoke, quiet enough that Gary had to lean in to hear it. "Go home." 2 words, but the way he said them didn't sound like a suggestion. It sounded like the last line of a conversation that Gary didn't realize was already over. Gary's fist came fast, sloppy, drunk. It never landed. Sujin caught his wrist mid-swing, redirected the momentum, used Gary's own weight against him. One fluid motion, wrist, elbow, shoulder, and Gary was face down on the hallway carpet with his arm pinned behind his back at an angle 1 inch from dislocation. 4 seconds, no punches thrown, no sound except Gary's grunt when his chest hit the floor. Sujin leaned down, close to Gary's ear. "If you come near her again, I won't stop at your arm." He let go, stood up, straightened his jacket. Gary lay there, not because he couldn't get up, because his brain was trying to process what had just happened. He was 6'1", 220, he'd grown up fighting. He'd never been put on the ground that fast by anyone, ever. He scrambled to his feet. His face was twisted, not with pain but with something deeper. Humiliation. The kind that doesn't fade. The kind that ferments into something poisonous. He didn't say a word, just walked to the stairs and drove off into the Houston night. Comfort opened the door. Sherry was behind her. Jessica behind Sherry. 3 women standing in a doorway looking at a man they didn't know who had just done what nobody in their lives had ever done. "Shown up." Sherry's eyes were red but dry. "He's going to come back. He always comes back." Sujin looked at her, really looked at her, not through her, not past her, at her. "Then I'll be here." 3 words that shouldn't have meant anything from a stranger. But the way he said them, steady, unhurried, like a man stating a fact about gravity, made Comfort take a step back from the door and let him in. They talked until 3 a.m. Sherry told him about the 2 years with Gary, the isolation, the way he'd cut her off from friends one by one, how he'd hit her the first time on a Tuesday and brought flowers on Wednesday and she'd stayed because the flowers felt like proof that the version of him she loved was still in there somewhere. Sujin listened, didn't interrupt, didn't offer solutions, just listened, because sometimes the most powerful thing a person can do for someone who's been silenced is simply let them speak. But what none of them knew was that across the street, in a parked Honda Civic, a 20-year-old kid named Terrence had been filming the hallway confrontation through the building's open breezeway. He caught everything, Gary's punch, the takedown, Sujin's whispered words. By 9 a.m., the video had 400 views on Twitter. By noon, 40,000. By 6 p.m., it had a title someone had added in bold text: "Asian Mafia boss destroys woman beater in hallway." By midnight, it had 2 million views. And Steve had watched it 14 times. That video was about to set off a chain reaction that would bury both brothers, but only one of them would see it coming. Steve sat in his kitchen, phone on the table, badge next to it, the video playing on a loop. His brother face down on the carpet, the man from the federal database standing over him like it was nothing. Steve made a call, To Belinda, the clerk who pulled files and never asked questions. He wanted leverage. An anonymous tip to immigration about a foreign national with suspected criminal ties. A wellness check on Harry at the hospital. Small bureaucratic grenades designed to pressure. To send a message, you're not invisible here. He sent the anonymous tip at 9:15 a.m. By 9:40 a.m., 2 immigration officers arrived at the Lancaster Hotel. Sujin came downstairs, calm, jacket buttoned. He answered every question with the patience of a man who had been questioned by people far more dangerous than 2 mid-level immigration officers in ill-fitting suits. His visa was valid. His documentation was flawless. And his attorney, a woman named Suyeon Park from a firm in Dallas that represented 3 Fortune 500 companies, was on the phone within 8 minutes and had the officers apologizing within 12. Sujin didn't travel with muscle. He didn't travel with weapons. He traveled with lawyers. And Suyeon was the best. By 10 a.m., the immigration officers were gone. By 10:15, Suyeon had filed a formal complaint against the Houston field office for harassment and requested records on who submitted the anonymous tip. Belinda saw the records request hit the system in real time. She called Steve immediately. Someone's pulling the thread. They want to know who submitted the tip. Can they trace it to me? 3 seconds of silence. 3 seconds is a long time when your career is hanging in the balance. If they push hard enough, yes. Steve hung up. His hands were shaking. He tried to use the system as a weapon, and the system was now turning in his hands like a blade with no handle. He sat there for a long time, badge on the table, video still playing on his phone. And for the first time in 12 years, Steve looked at the badge and didn't see protection. He saw a mirror, and in it he saw his father. The man who used whatever power he had, a belt, a fist, a voice, to control what he was too broken to love. Steve had spent his whole career telling himself he was different. He wore the badge to protect people. But who had he been protecting? Not Sherry. Not the woman before Sherry. He'd been protecting Gary. And protecting Gary meant enabling the exact thing their father had taught them both. That the person with the most power gets to decide what's real. Steve picked up the badge, turned it over in his hands, set it back down. Then he opened his laptop and started typing. A resignation letter. And Gary, the reason all of this started, had no idea any of it was happening, because Gary was parked outside Comfort's apartment again. Watching. Waiting. With something in the glove compartment he'd never carried before. Gary pulled into the cafe parking lot at 4:47 p.m. He'd been watching Comfort's apartment all day, saw Sherry leave with Jessica around noon, followed them to Rosewood on Main, the same cafe where it all started, like the universe was writing a joke and he was too far gone to hear the punchline. He sat in his car for 20 minutes, engine running, glove compartment open, the weight of what sat inside pressing against the air like a second heartbeat. The video had broken something in him that was already cracked. 2 million people had watched him get put on the floor like a child, comments calling him weak, pathetic, a coward who hits women but folds when a real one shows up. He grabbed what was in the glove compartment, tucked it in his waistband, stepped out of the car. Sherry saw him through the window before he reached the door. Her coffee cup stopped halfway to her lips. Jessica grabbed her hand under the table. Gary walked in, chest out, eyes locked on Sherry. And then he saw Sujin. Sitting at the same table by the window, same seat, same stillness, like he'd never left, like he'd been waiting. He had been. Suyeon had called that morning with an update. Steve's tip had been traced. Internal Affairs was opening an inquiry. But she also warned Sujin Gary's behavior was escalating. The pattern was textbook, obsession tightening into a spiral. Sujin knew what was coming, not because he was psychic, because he'd watched his father walk the same spiral 30 years ago. The drinking, the driving past the house, the muttering, the moment when the man convinces himself that if he can't have control, no one will. So Soojin went to the café, sat down, and waited. Gary stopped 6 feet from the table. His hand moved toward his waistband. Soojin stood up, slowly, the way he did everything. "You think you can just take what's mine?" The words from the opening. The moment this whole story has been building toward. But here's what the opening didn't show you. Soojin's response. He looked at Gary, really looked at him, and for the first time, he didn't see a threat. He saw a 9-year-old boy standing in a hallway watching his father break something that couldn't be fixed. He saw the same wound wearing a different face, the same cycle spinning in a different body. "She was never yours, Gary." 6 words, no anger, no threat, just truth delivered so quietly that Gary's hand froze at his waistband. The cafe door opened behind Gary. 2 men. Harry, who had ignored every order Soojin ever gave him for the first time in 11 years, and behind him, Steve, not in uniform, not carrying authority, carrying something heavier. "Shame." "Gary," Steve's voice cracked. "It's over. Put your hands where I can see them." Gary turned and looked at his brother. Looked at the man who'd covered for him his whole life standing there with tears running down his face and a resignation letter folded in his back pocket. Gary's hand dropped from his waistband. His knees buckled. He went down right there on the cafe floor, not from a takedown this time, but from the weight of everything he'd refused to carry finally landing on him all at once. The police arrived 4 minutes later. Real ones, not Steve's connections, not favors, just consequences. They found a gun tucked in Gary's waistband, loaded, safety off. Sherry watched them put Gary in the back of the cruiser. She didn't cry, she didn't celebrate, she just breathed. For the first time in years, she just breathed. Soojin stood beside her, not touching her, not claiming anything, just present. "What happens now?" she asked. Soojin looked at her, thought about his mother, thought about the dishcloth splint and the wooden spoon and the woman who taught him that stillness was survival. "Now, you move first." Sherry looked at him, confused. He almost smiled. "The man who moves first loses. That's what my mother told me, but she was wrong about one thing. She was talking about surviving, not living." He paused, let the words settle. "You've survived long enough, Sherry. Now you get to move first, on your terms, toward whatever you want." She looked at the cafe, at Jessica holding the door open, at Comfort pulling up in her car outside, at the world that had been a cage for so long it had started to feel like home. She took a step, then another. Harry walked up beside Soojin as they watched Sherry cross the parking lot toward her sister. "The scans came back," Harry said. "It's benign." Soojin closed his eyes, just for a moment, let that land. "Good." "Soojin." "Oh. You broke every rule Kwon ever taught you this week. Every single one." Soojin opened his eyes, watched Sherry get into Comfort's car, watched Jessica climb in after her, watched the car pull away into the Houston sun. "Some rules are meant to be outgrown." Harry looked at him. "So what now, back to Incheon?" Soojin buttoned his jacket, turned toward the Escalade. The Houston skyline sat orange against the afternoon haze, a city he'd never planned to visit, would probably never return to, and would never forget. "Back to Incheon," he said. And for the first time in 30 years, Soojin moved first. And that's the story. If this one hit you different, if you felt something, drop a comment and tell me which part gave you chills. If someone in your life needs to hear that they're allowed to move first, send them this video. And if you're not subscribed yet, come on now. You already watched the whole thing, you're one of us. Hit subscribe and I'll see you in the next one. It's already written, and it's darker than this one.